Thank you for staying with us. Now, droughts are among the greatest threats to sustainable development, especially in developing countries such as ours.
And it contributes to hunger as well.
Oh, most certainly. Most certainly. I mean, you spoke about it the other time when I mentioned drought. You said, hey, rainy season is here. There can't be drought. But, you know, I guess it's one of those things we'll take on with our guests. So forecasts estimate that by 2050, droughts may affect over 3/4 of the world's population. The number and duration of drought has increased by 29% since 2000. That's year 2000, as compared to the previous decades. When more than 2.3 billion people already face water stress, this is a huge problem. It is impacting more than 70 million Nigerians and 75 hectares of land.
75 million?
Yeah. Women hold a vital stake in the health of the land, yet they don't often have control over it. Yeah. Let's have this focus on World Day to Combat Desertification and Drought with Joseph Onoja, who is DG Nigerian Conservation Foundation. He joins us along with Tabi Joda, who is a consultant climate, gender and security in the Sahel, United Nations Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute, as well as Professor Adepoju Adeshola, Chair and President of the International Coordinating Council of the Program on Man and Biosphere Reserve. Thank you all for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. Let me begin with you, Mr. Onoja. How much of a threat is this? One of the challenges a number of people will have when we hear these figures, maybe not, let me not ask about the threat. First of all, the awareness, the consciousness of this reality. You mentioned about 70 million Nigerians being impacted and 75 million hectares of land being impacted. So how aware are we as a people? Is there any sense of urgency that you can say, okay, Nigerians know this and consequently they're even concerned enough to take whatever precautionary measure they should?
Unfortunately, thank you very much for having me. I must look from the last set of speakers that talked about food security. And this topic is very, very fundamental to that topic that we're talking about, food security. And unfortunately, not many people are aware of what is happening and the threat that the desertification causes, because it doesn't affect all over Nigeria at the moment, even though if it continues the way it is going on, we are going to be faced with serious issues, because we have what we call the frontline states in Nigeria, that is about the 11 or so 15 states in the northern part of the country that are faced with this, and the reality is really facing them, and those ones are aware. But when you go down to the middle part of the country and the southern part of the country, not many people are aware of it. And the sad part of it is that these are areas that are agrarian, and most of our food come from this area, especially when we talk about our cereals and so on. So it is a threat to our food security, talking from the last set of guests that spoke on food security, and it's also a threat to our general well-being. But as I said, not many people are aware of it, and that is the danger. And that is why a day like this is set aside, so that we'll continue to create awareness, so that people will know that this is an imminent threat to us, to our well-being, to our security.
If you can hear me, pardon me for a second. What do you think is responsible for that poor awareness? Is it that they do not see the things that are happening, or it's too far away from their realities?
I think, as I said, the frontline states are aware of it because it's happening in their domain. But the other states, if we don't travel to those parts, then it will be as if, oh, it's a picture. When you talk about Sahara Desert, a lot of people see it in picture, except people who have the opportunity flying over to Europe, and they are flying over Sahara Desert and they are seeing it. but not everybody is that way. For instance, when you talk to somebody who is in the southern part of the country and living in a forested habitat, it will be difficult for the person who has not traveled to the north to imagine what it means that sand.
Well, I'll come back to you, Mr. Onoja. I'll come back to you because, there are those who would say, hey, all of these people that you're talking about who live with these realities have representation all over the country, including in the National Assembly. Well, I'll come back to you on that one. And let me ask you, Mr. Joda, I mean, with all of the work that you've been doing in the shall I say, endangered spaces and populations of the country, what have you seen? How welcoming is any initiative to reverse this trend? And is there any role any state government you've seen playing in all of these?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and I'm grateful to add my voice to this global conversation on this day of desertification and drought. And it's amazing that the earlier speaker was citing something around knowledge. And let me intervene a little bit to that before I move to the issue of best practices like you are asking. You don't need to be aware of desertification to feel the effect of desertification. And I want to point a finger very quickly to the gap on awareness, which is a responsibility of the policy stratum of Nigeria that is often disguising the reality around, the effects of desertification and drought and the parameters with which people should appreciate the extent of the threat and the challenges. So, for instance, if you see in recent times the movement of herder communities moving southward of Nigeria, the question is why? Why now? So you don't have to go to Sokoto to see desertification and drought effects live to understand that there is a threat on ground. This encroachment, further encroachment down south is a push by the existential threats of drought and desertification that is encroaching, or that has encroached holistically all the communities in these frontline states, as my brother earlier mentioned, necessitating those stakeholders who need access to these fodder or pasture fields or water, which is highly depleted by the desertification itself. They necessitate them to move down southward where there is still lush and pasture. So if we need awareness should begin from identifying or understanding the extent of the threat which we are already feeling right now around the country. So in terms of best practices, I am equally ambassador of the Great Green Wall, which is working on the expanse of the 8,000 kilometers from West Cape of Africa, from Senegal, Mauritania, right to the Horn of Africa in Djibouti and Somalia, where a whole lot of models are actually existing that are fighting back the desert. And in that, some of our work has seen the planting of over 3.7 million trees in critically endangered communities where critically endangered species actually previously thrived, but now they are undermined by the effects of this drought and desertification. And this set of models you can see around the leg chart, how it is equally transmitting into some of the social cohesion that you can now see in the leg chart which previously did not exist 7, 8, 10 years ago, when the threat and impact of desertification and drought was really ripe. So we've been able to capture the essence of using nature-based solutions through regeneration, conservation, restoration, and holistic set of ecosystem development approaches to bring back viable pasture land, pasture fields, freshwater fish, and different ecosystem services that are necessary for thriving communities, enabling communities' livelihood, especially responding to food insecurity, responding to land degradation, responding to poverty, and even those drivers that necessitate irregular migration of people and stakeholders who need access to these resources. So we can quickly cite the example around the leg chart in these communities where social cohesion has been restored as a result of these interventions that we have had through restoring the land. And of course, it's not just the human intervention. The holistic impact includes conservation of wildlife reserves, also reviving or rehabilitation of ecosystem services that have attracted, the convergence or the re-emergence of dispersers, pollinators, and other species that previously didn't thrive in those communities or that were threatened by the depletion, but now they are reconverging as a result of the comeback or the rehabilitation of these landscapes. Holistically, it's very important for us to note also that at this moment, it doesn't mean that these solutions are enough. The situation is still very rife. You can see stark land degradation impact that has undermined the livelihoods of communities, condemning any source of livelihood and putting communities at serious threat of even having the ability to access common, viable, productive land to plant a seed for it to grow around the year. And this is connected to the interplay with the weather variabilities and different onsets, and of course, the movement of either people from areas that are heavily depleted, kind of creating pressures on communities that still have some little level of viable biodiversity or ecosystem services. And then within a very short period of time, the population explosion actually also impacts that land and depletes it again.
Okay.
So there is a cycle of depletion, regeneration, restoration, conservation, and depletion again as social factors such as population growth, is also playing, interplaying with other biophysical and geophysical impacts.
Okay. Let me bring in Professor Adeshola. Professor, the theme for this year's Day Against Desertification and Drought is Her Land, Her Rights. I'd like to ask you, what informed the choice of this theme? It all has to do with the woman. Why? Professor Adeshola.
You're muted, Prof.
Professor,
Are you
yes.
hearing me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you for having me. This is a quite interesting program, and that's why I had to really cut my trip short. I'm just arriving from an international discourse on the same issue. It's important that we bring gender issue in, and I'm happy to have my brother, Dr. Noja, there, because this is a major player in the field. I think we're moving towards the right direction now, because in the past, you just talk about reforestation, reclamation of land, and all of this, forgetting the actual participants of this work. Like the immediate speaker mentioned about our work on the Great Green Wall, because I was just the immediate past national coordinator of afforestation. When you're covering 11 states, 11 countries across the belt of Africa, and women are not brought into the issue, and we're only talking about just planting trees or just reversing deforestation and all of that, then what are the people living in this forest going to be living with? Then we'll start thinking about their livelihood, and who are really the numerical strength in the area of these activities now? Women. But in the past, yes, men are into business of all of that, but actually we realize that women and children and youth need to be focused upon to be able to achieve what we're talking about, because when you plant the trees, you walk away. Now the women have to do their cooking, they're in the rural area, and the Enlightenment campaign had always been majorly in the urban area. The activity that's going on today, you agree with me, there's a process going on in Abuja. There are mass movement to educate people, and so also they will do in other capital states. capital of Nigerian state, but how many trees are we planting in the state or in the state capital? All of these activities actually in the rural area. And who are the people that should be enlightened in the rural area? Is this women and the youth who live with it, who are the ones really facing the drought squarely. It's easier to talk about drought in the city, but you need to go to the rural area and see what the women and the youth are passing through. So now we're thinking, let's really bring the actors into the game, because they do better than men in maintaining even what we are planting or the livelihood in the rural area. And that's why I agree with what is being done now in the Great Green Wall, because it's not only about planting tree, it's also to establish the gardening, the ornamental activities for the women in the rural area to live on while they maintain whatever we're planting. So this is what makes the gender biasness of this year theme stronger than the past, because this will actually help us to achieve a greater percentage of our implementation plans.
Professor, just a little observation. In many parts of the world, when there's a drought or when there's shortage of water, it's mainly women you see with their pots of water on their heads or with their buckets going in search of water. Does this have anything to do with why this is the theme?
That's part of the issue we have identified, not only in the rural area, almost in everything, almost even in crisis, in whatever, women are always at the receiving end. We're saying this with all concern for the women and the youth. But I think all the actors have to get back to the drawing table in all our natural and environmental activities to give women their adequate position so that at least we'll be able to do that. So it's all of those things that you have also seen that inform us looking around the gender participations in every activities of reversing deforestation, desertification, and the biodiversity loss in general. So this is what we have seen also. You see children suffering, the women are the one that has to trek several miles. You can't really appreciate the Victoria, whatever they are saying, but some of them will not only trek, they will also have to begin to dig and leave such place overnight to allow a little water to gather for them to collect the following day. But this is actually the issue of ground is staring at us. But to tell you that it should go beyond us celebrating a day to mark what they are passing through, but rather to go back to the drawing table, all the policy makers, the actors, and really let us practice what we're talking about.
Okay, Prof.
And should they end with today? Thank you.
Yeah. Let me come back to Mr. Onoja. Talking about the last issue that Prof raised, which is that of policies, going back to the drawing board and all of that. This issue isn't just happening on us, Mr. Onoja. It's always a build-up. I had reason to go to my own village from time to time, and I've been to a number of other places. And I know that these things don't just spring on us. It's always a gradual progression. How did we get here? What are the things governments, especially at the local government levels and the state government levels, should have done or were doing that they stopped doing and left undone that brought us here? Maybe that will give us pointers to doing what Prof said, not just making it a celebration for a day, but to actually do something about it progressively.
Okay, so you will permit me, because of the importance of the theme, because that's where our emphasis should lie, her land, her rights, it's good for us to really expound it a bit more before I go into where we dropped the ball. You see, to add to what Prof said, women, even scientifically, has been shown that their lands are more productive in terms of biodiversity protection than the ones that men do. A colleague of mine, Dr. Hope Seta, who did a work on farmlands and farm tenure system of men and women, found out that the lands that are managed by women actually had more biodiversity in it than that of men. And then he further found out that the yield are the same. That means if you allow women to manage lands, we'll have more biodiversity and we'll have more food. So that's what is good for us to emphasize. And that's why there's a need for us to bring back the importance of women in playing in this field. And it's very important to underscore the importance of the theme for this year. Now, talking about where we have dropped the ball, especially at the local government level, I must say that the local government, which is the closest government here to the people, we have gone moribund over the years, and with a lot of things suffering from it. Because there are some, I know in those days, there are some rural programs that used to happen, including regular reforestation of our lands that has since been wiped off. Whether it's because of the fiscal policy or their subventions that are not getting to them or whatever it is, the political system has kind of destroyed the local government system as we have, and they are not able to carry out the responsibility they're supposed to carry out. And one of these responsibilities, because the local government is close to the people, is to ensure that our lands are fertile, our lands are protected, our lands are not as degraded as they are. As you said, it's a gradual process. And if we don't tackle it at the bottom, at the base, at the root cause of the issue, then we have all of this issue becomes a national issue. Because, I mean, these things happen gradually. And then because there are no stopgaps or there are no policies on the ground, right at the grassroots level to ensure that this thing is nipped at the bud, it just springs up to us. It seems as if it springs up to us. But when you go to these local government areas and you go to these rural areas, the rate of deforestation that is going on, I know that when you deforest the place, you leave the land bare. The land is not able to revive itself. As Mr. Tabi said, when you have just a few places where a lot of resources are gathered, everybody comes there, and then because when people migrate, there's no place in vacuum. There will be conflict because some of this resource sharing is not done evenly and is not done seamlessly, and it's done all of a sudden. So there will be serious conflict, and because it's happening at the grassroots level, it now springs up to be a national issue, and that is what is facing us now. So it goes beyond just this issue of drought and desertification. It also goes about just the policy arrangement of the Nigerian system in all, because that is where the problem is. Not an isolated thing. And that's why you will see that when something is not right, it affects every other thing. And you find out that it goes beyond just this drought we are talking about. It talks about poverty. It talks about food security. It talks about even the health system as well. I know all of these are all intertwined. So when we need to look at it in a holistic manner to be able to ensure that we have this done. And at the end of the day, the women folks and the children are the ones at the receiving end. And that's why we continue to emphasize that there is a need to have that, to get it right from the grassroots, so that we will be able to have a holistic approach, so that when the environment is healthy, then the citizenry will be healthy, because then you will talk about they will have healthy food, they will have access to healthcare, because the money they will spend on healthcare would not necessarily be there because the environment is already taking care of them.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Noja. Mr. Joda, I'd like you to share your experience along the line of what Dr. Noja has spoken about, especially in your work planting trees and trying to reforest, if I can use that word. Of course, I know there's something all of you are doing. Share your experience, especially at the local government level, in the rural areas. When you go there, what kind of engagement do you have with the women, with the children, with the young people, with the people in those communities? What are their complaints? How well do you think how aware are they of the responsibility of governments to them in this regard? You're kindly on mute, please. We can't hear you.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. It's very key. I think it's connecting to what Onoja and Prof said earlier. But let me also highlight before I go deep into that, drought and desertification are not only risk drivers, they are also risk multipliers. That's why the different interconnectedness of climate risk, social risk, even political risk and upheavals are driven by the catastrophic convergence of these, either biophysical and social impacts that are interplaying each other and creating pressures on the polity. We must be aware of that so that we don't dissociate the impact of land degradation, drought, and desertification from what is happening at the national level as violence. And there was a question that was asked earlier, how does climate change create or cause violence or conflict? This is very straight. When resources are strained, people engage in violent competition over the scarce resources. And what creates scarce resources? Nothing creates scarce resources like the depletion and erosion of biodiversity and ecosystem services, like my friend Onoja earlier said. So for engagement in communities that we have been carrying out over the last decade years and a few years, it's been a lot about bringing to the mindset of the people the understanding of not just the physical restoration of landscape, but human knowledge restoration, narrative restoration, attitude and habit restoration. Because the initial cause of drought and desertification originates from reckless and unsustainable farming practices, herding or livestock or grazing practices, hunting practices, fishing practices. All this combination of factors create the degradations of the environment, keeping our soils bare and liable to the desertification and drought. So this has been some of the biggest engagements that we have with women, with youths, with pastoralists, with farmers, with herders, and different stakeholders that use natural resources as their means of well-being, food, and economic activities. So this has been the core of the different engagements that we are having so that people understand that we are not planting just trees physically, but we are growing trees at the same time growing hope. Because where hope is lost, dignity stops existing. And when dignity is lost, people lose nothing even when they can, when they can prey on each other. So our job has been to engage people, create these viable ecosystems, services, development, management through connecting value chains from the existing resources and those that we restore. So when we plant trees, we create the relationship between these trees and the people, how you manage the trees, how you intersect the trees, how you create biodiversity where you can attract back pollinators like bees, like bats, you can attract dispersers like other wildlife, bats and things that are necessary for the thriving of these trees that we plant. Because trees don't grow in isolation. They grow also in a symbiotic relationship with other natural factors like what I've mentioned earlier. So it needs awareness raising, it needs capacity building on the knowledges that people need on how to maintain, on how to conserve these landscapes that have been restored, and it also needs capacity on how people can resource these natural resources, not by cutting the trees to make charcoal, but by how they can conserve and protect these trees so that the fruits of these trees, the roots of these trees, the nuts and the oils and the leaves that can be converted into food that helps their food security, that can be converted into medicine that helps them stay healthy, that can be converted into different economic opportunities or economic resources that they can sell and to be able to have money in their pockets instead of cutting them down for short-term gains like charcoal or wood fuel, immediately. So there's an interconnection of these, and that is how we've been able to connect these communities from Senegal, from Mauritania, from Burkina Faso, Mali, Nigeria, northern Nigeria, in the Lake Chad area, most especially in the Sahel part of Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon, Burkina Faso, Djibouti, Somalia, in connecting the dots around this holistic knowledge that they need. Because planting trees and leaving it for people doesn't mean anything. They need the knowledge on how to care for these trees.
Okay.
And they also need the knowledge on how to understand that these trees are a part and parcel of their livelihood.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Joda. Let me ask you, Prof. I mean, Mr. Joda has spoken about the international connections. We all know that these things that we're talking about, desertification and drought, is not limited to one state or the other. And since you have also said that there is a nexus between the rural areas and the urban Nigeria, it then presupposes that there is that germane need for states and local governments to collaborate. Even the federal government to have some kind of partnership with the states and the local governments to ensure that we still have our nation the way it ought to be. What kind, Prof, of collaboration would you be recommending, and how would you suggest it be approached at the various levels of government in Nigeria?
Thank you. Once again, I must commend channels for helping the stakeholders to achieve this. Sincerely, I'm excited that you're playing this role for the country. Some of us who have been in this job for close to 3 decades were in pain. And like Dr. Noja said, in the last 8-10 years, we have tried to engage the state government to let them see why this is important. There are so many activities that we undertook alongside the NCF. There's a serious disconnect, and we must not shy away from that. And irrespective of how important we think this assignment is, and until the stakeholders, probably led by the federal government, with some agreement or understanding, I don't want to say law now or enforcement. Since the time we had the Land Use Act, that was the beginning of the country. That was the beginning of the problem. The state has absolute control over their land. The federal becomes more or less the policy maker. And when you are making policy that you cannot enforce, then it's also amounts to waste of resources. And when you talk about the local government, I'm sorry to say, what power does any local government has? If the resources of a local government has to pass through the state government, and the state government will decide what the money is used for. And you go to local government, which was originally where every activities always commenced in the past. And we need to also evolve the way things are done in the world. If you go to Europe, you can buy charcoal even in the supermarket, in the mall. So doing charcoal business really is not an issue. It's to get the policy right. If somebody is into charcoal business, where is his plantation that he planted, that is collecting his resources from? I give you an example. We call it tree Tectona grandis. That's thick. It takes about 10 years to mature. Now, if somebody is going to charcoal business and it's approved by government, and that person is doing 1 hectare per year, and such a person planted about 20 hectares or maximum 11 hectares, that means every year, if you take out 1 hectare, 10 hectares is still standing. Beyond this business is contributing to climate change gain, and it's also will be assisting the rural area where I planted on socio-economic activities. You also have to be supporting that local government with some corporate social responsibility.
But it's quite my apologies. It sounds to me like a lot of work, needs to be done. That
exactly.
We haven't even.
Exactly.
It sounds like we haven't even scratched the surface at all. I mean,
at all.
But that's one of the reasons we have the Dr. Onojas of Nigeria to ensure that we keep on the ball, and he's been doing a yeoman's job at that. But right now we're at a time we have to wrap up this conversation at this particular point. But you can be sure, Prof, that Dr. Onoja is not going to let us rest. He will ensure that we stay on the issues. We have to thank you very much all for being here this morning. Professor Adepoju Adeshola is Chair and President of the International Coordinating Council of the Program on Man and Biosphere Reserve, as well as Tabi Joda, who is a consultant, climate, gender and security in the Sahel, United Nations Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute, as well as Dr. Joseph Onoja, Director General, Nigerian Conservation Foundation. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen, and for the wonderful work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Something else we have been thinking about doing for years. Now we're talking about it again. That's what's up next. Stay with us.